Hi, good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Hui Wilcox. I am the Dean of Kofi Annan Institute for Global Citizenship at Macalester College. I'm so glad you are all here for an important conversation, very timely conversation about the role of liberal arts education in today's world and what a world we live in. So I am very grateful for this opportunity to work with President Rivera and Citizens League over the past year in imagining and shaping this event. It's been a true pleasure to collaborate with you all. A big thank you to Lisa McCarthy for coordinating the event logistics on campus, and to Rebecca DeJarles Ortiz and Max Danielowitz for supporting this effort. Now, I will invite all of us to take a deep breath as I share Macalister's land acknowledgement as part of our college's ritual. Macalester College is located on the homeland of the Dakota people, Minnesota Makoche, which translates to land where the waters reflect the clouds. We acknowledge the traumatic impacts of historical and persistent settler colonialism and the flourishing of Dakota people despite this painful history. We honor the Dakota people, ancestors, and descendants, as well as the land itself. We engage in work toward repair and partnership with the Dakota people and the land, as well as to support Indigenous members of our campus community. Now, another breath, if you like, to complete our modest but necessary ritual. Without further ado, let me bring to the stage Luna Allen Bakarian, Director of Public Policy at Citizens League. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. On behalf of Citizens League, welcome to this Mind Opener event at the intersection of liberal arts education and civic life, and welcome to the beautiful Mayor's Hall on the Macalester College campus. My name is Luna Allen Bakarian. I serve as the Director of Public Policy for Citizens League, and I have the honor of welcoming you to this space and this conversation, and of introducing our esteemed panel, all of whom are alumni of liberal arts degree programs. Citizens League is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization amplifying civic engagement and public policy work for a better Minnesota for all. Nearly 75 years ago, Citizens League began as a group of civilians getting together to discuss public policy issues and seeking to make an impact. There have been many chapters and eras of our organization's work, and today we create shared civic experiences in a number of ways, through events like this one in the Mind Opener series and interconnected events in partnership with the Center for Rural Policy and Development, through the facilitation of civic workshops, and through projects in collaboration with cross-sector partners that center research, qualitative and quantitative, and through two signature programs, Capital Pathways, a policy career pathways internship for undergraduate students of color each spring during the legislative session in collaboration with a number of host sites, designed to shift the public policy ecosystem in Minnesota. Now in its 11th year, Capital Pathways has an alumni network several hundred strong, many of whom are present at the Capitol in various capacities, and the Minnesota Legislative Exchange, a new program launched in the last year, modeled after the American Congressional Exchange, in which members of the state legislature across the political aisle pair up and host each other in their districts for 1 to 2 days to build human connection and understanding. There are many ways you can engage with us to learn more about our work and participate, and I'll give some specific invitations after the panel when we close. Tonight we are talking about liberal arts, and perhaps the most important takeaway from my own liberal arts education and experience is the power and practice of both and thinking. The liberal arts, in my experience, have encouraged and bolstered an open and flexible mind, curiosity, and creativity. A both and mindset is not simply there are two sides to every story, nor is it only all roads are right, it's just a matter of which path you take. Rather, it is a constant grappling with many things being the case at once, and that different lived truths mean different realities and consequences. This is challenging, and it provides a platform for critical thinking and creative collaboration. This is especially true as we engage in the dance of civic life, which we're going to hear more about this evening. Before we start, I want to express thanks to the team at Citizens League, Jake, Maddie, Yvonne, Dominic, and Jacob, and our 2 McAllister interns, Anai and Hamza, for all of your work on this mind opener and all the time. Thank you to McAllister College, the Kofi Annan Institute for Global Citizenship, and the Music Department for working with us and hosting us in this beautiful space. Big thanks to President Rivera, Hui, Lisa, Rebecca, Max, Casey, and Chris, and anyone else I haven't mentioned who helped put this together on the McAllister side. And thank you to all of you for being here, and big thanks to our fantastic panel, who I will introduce now. I'm delighted to learn alongside of all of you from a rock star panel of women during Women's History Month, even though, as is the case with all history and heritage months, women's history is all the time history. Dr. Suzanne M. Rivera is McAllister College's 17th president. Dr. Rivera is a nationally recognized academic leader and an advocate for equitable access to higher education. She is a frequent speaker and writer on the public purpose of colleges and universities, the importance of the liberal arts for a thriving democracy, and the contributions made to society by pluralistic academic institutions. Prior to her arrival at McAllister, President Rivera served in academic and leadership roles at Case Western Reserve University, UT Southwestern Medical Center, and the University of California, Irvine. Zot, is that correct? Love. A scholar of bioethics and public policy, her research is focused on the moral dimensions of science. She co-edited the book Specimen Science and has authored numerous peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and public scholarship pieces addressing topics at the intersection of ethics, policy, and social justice. She serves on the board of several professional societies and councils nationally and locally. Her local civic leadership includes serving as a trustee of the Science Museum of Minnesota and College Possible. Dr. Rivera earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Brown University, a Master of Social Work degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and a PhD in Public Affairs from the University of Texas at Dallas. Dr. Wendy Robinson currently serves as the Assistant Commissioner for Programs, Policies, and Grants at the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. In her current role, she has responsibility for a variety of critical areas, including research, student basic needs, and policy development around increasing college access, attainment, and affordability. She has an extensive background in higher education, including previous positions as a vice president for student affairs at Inver Hills Community College and a director of student support services at Simpson College. She holds a bachelor's degree in American history from Calvin University, a master's degree in higher education from the University of Arizona, and a doctorate in higher education administration from Iowa State University. E. Kyle is the president and CEO of the St. Paul Area Chamber, an organization that affiliates with other chambers and business associations to represent the voices of more than 1,800 companies. Previously, Kyle spent 11 years in economic development at the St. Paul Port Authority and 20 years in the private sector business community. She is a veteran U.S. Army officer, thank you, and serves on the boards of the Minnesota Precision Manufacturing Association, MPMA, and the National Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives. Kyle was included in Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal's Most Admired CEOs in 2020 and has also been honored as one of MPMA's 65 most influential people. She is an alum of the College of St. Benedict. And our moderator this evening is Annie Baxter, the editor of Minnesota Public Radio's Talking Sense series, which helps Minnesotans have hard political conversations better. Previously, she served as an editor on the Wall Street Journal's daily flagship podcast, The Journal. Annie has a long history with NPR and American Public Media and has worn many hats at the company since 2003. She covered business and the economy, first in NPR's regional newsroom and then for the national program Marketplace. And she developed and led 2 podcasts through WaterMain, APM's initiative focused on water issues. Annie also co-teaches a narrative journalism class at McAllister College. So with that, let's give it up for our rock star panel, and Annie, over to you.
Well, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much to Citizens League and to McAllister for hosting this event. As Luna mentioned, we're all liberal arts majors, alums, and I never thought that my degree in philosophy and French would get me as far as it did, but it seems to have worked out so far. I married a fellow journalist who also studied at a liberal arts college here at Macalester. And I just want you to know, Sue, that the rule to not live more than a mile outside of campus, he does abide by that. So the electric fence that you guys have going is working very well. So congratulations on that. So, well, obviously the world has changed a lot since all of us came through our liberal arts educations. And
You're trying to say we're old?
well, you know, forever young. When we were talking about this a little bit in the green room just now, that we all had regular employment, but the pace of change is accelerating. The world is a really different place. I know I have a 13-year-old son. I wonder, what should he do? Should he follow a similar path? Should he become a carpenter? Like, I don't know what to think of where he should go at. And so I have a kind of a dog in this fight, this conversation. I'm really interested to know what you all have to say. So, Stu, I would like to start with you. Could you just maybe set the table here and make sure we all have our definitions? What exactly is a liberal arts education? Is it a slate of majors? Is it, as Luna was suggesting, a way of thinking? Maybe just kind of, and then what are the benefits? So if you could get us started.
Thank you. I'm happy to start. And let me begin by welcoming all of you to Macalester. We're delighted to see you all on our campus. It's an aspect of our strategic plan that we intend to break down the metaphorical walls of the campus and be a good neighbor here in St. Paul. So seeing people come in is especially fun for me to be doing this panel this way. I think that some people hear the term liberal arts and they think it is a way of talking about the humanities only. So let's begin by dispelling that myth and say that the liberal arts have always included, yes, the humanities, but also the natural sciences, the social sciences, and the arts, by which I mean the fine arts and the performing arts. So a liberal arts curriculum is broad by design, and a liberal arts degree involves being trained in ways of thinking, ways of learning that someone can carry through their career regardless of what particular discipline or program they chose to major in within the liberal arts curriculum. So what I mean by ways of thinking or ways of learning is that a liberal arts degree will not just give you knowledge of a particular set of content information, but rather will give you a toolkit that you can use through the rest of your life as you navigate or move through different kinds of careers or learn different kinds of content expertise. And those tools are things like effective communication, persuasive argumentation, asking good questions, solving problems in creative ways, thinking in an interdisciplinary way to make connections, developing the practice of discernment and the ability to make meaning. And you can apply that toolkit to any kind of job you might have. So I'm saying that that is in contrast to the kind of degree one might get in a more technically oriented program where the degree really is you have memorized this skill set of, or this set of content, and you have the skills to do this one job. A liberal arts degree is intending to prepare people for life, not merely for the first job out of college.
And B, I wanted to jump to you just to get your take on what you see as the benefits to a liberal arts education within our state's economy. What do employers see in the graduates of those programs that are valuable?
Well, I would echo a lot with what Sue said. I would submit that when your first job out of school, it's really great to be technically proficient in a particular job. But I would submit the more important requirement in business community is what you've already spoken to, Sue, which is it's less about that you think, it's more about, it's less about what you think, but that you think and how you think, right? And when I think about our members and I think about the young people and I think about on my own team, what we need most importantly, is the human element that can't be replicated by machine or by math. And it's the critical thinking and the EQ, as we would call the durable skills.
Note, she said durable, not soft. Do you want to tell us why?
Did you say tell us why?
Yeah, what's the
Well, I think it just reflects what Sue just said, which is it goes with you. You know, in my mind, my particular skill set has less to do with that I'm really good at math or I'm really good at computers, but that I can have a conversation with another person about how we use those computers, how we apply that math, and by definition, durable stays with you and only gets better over time.
So, of course, we're having this conversation, though, against a backdrop of student debt levels rising, the cost of higher ed skyrocketing over the past several decades. And Wendy, you were throwing down some really good data back there in the green room about the metrics that show that a liberal arts education is still worth it, despite all of those trends. So, could you tell us what you have there in your brain?
Yeah, and I'm going to back up for a second. I also want to address the what is a liberal arts question, if I may. When I think about it, I think one of the real benefits of a liberal arts education for me was that when you graduate, you are both a subject matter expert in a particular lane. For me, it was social and cultural history of the U.S. Not surprisingly, I've never actually had a job related to social cultural history of the United States. But I was also a generalist, right? Because I could research, I could write, I could communicate, I could do all of those things. So when I entered the employment market, I could enter on the lane of here's my subject matter expertise, or I could enter the job market on the lane of here's my general skills and here's how I have an ability to learn and communicate and do all of these great things. So I actually think for me it's that duality that you may or may not find as a liberal arts graduate a degree or a job that directly ties to what your degree was in, but you're probably going to find employment based on all those general skills that you brought with you as a result of that education. Okay, so brace yourselves. I'm going to get a little bit nerdy here because that's who I am, and that's what you've signed up for. You're here on a Tuesday evening to talk about what the future of liberal arts education is. We are in a moment in higher education where there's a lot of conversation about values of degrees, return on investment, which degrees pay off, which degrees don't pay off. And I'll start by saying I think that's a really valid conversation. We know that college has gotten more expensive. We know that the costs of college have outpaced inflation and a lot of other expenses in life that have gone up over the last 40 years. I think that conversation is a little bit more nuanced because I think there's a lot of things. College is actually, for some students, more affordable than they realize, and we could have a whole other evening conversation about college affordability. But I think it's really fair and valid for people to have that question of, like, if I'm sending my kid to college, if I'm going to college myself, is it going to pay off for me when I'm done? Is the investment that I'm making of both my time and of potentially the student loan debt that I'm taking on going to be worth it? I have a high school senior. We are in the midst of having those conversations right now as he's making his college choices. One of the ways that there's attempts to answer that question is to say, okay, well, let's look at what the outcomes are based on what degree types or programs of study students went into. And let's look at, a year after they graduate, who's employed and how much money are they making? Oh, okay, well, that's a measure that you can use, right? But it's a complicated measure because is the best measure of the value of your degree or your credential what you did the first job that you had when you were 21 and you were just a brand new baby adult out in the world kind of figuring out where do I want to live, who do I want to be, what's my job going to be? Those measures sometimes also don't account for things like how many of these graduates are in graduate school? People in the liberal arts often go to graduate school, they go to law school, they go to the Peace Corps, they go to AmeriCorps. If they're not pulled out of that data, it paints a really different picture about what those outcomes are. It also doesn't account for things like, did somebody who had the same degree, one person has a degree in engineering from a liberal arts institution, one person has a degree in engineering from a Research One institution. When you look at the data, those people are grouped together, so you start losing some comparison there. You can also look at it and say, let's look at it from 5 years after graduation. Let's look at it 10 years after graduation. Is your first job predictive of what your working career will look like? I think that's a really important question to also grapple with these days because most people are not going to just have one job for one employer doing one thing for the 45, 50 years of their working life. Most people are going to have multiple careers. And so I just get really... it raises a lot of questions for me when we decide to look at that measure on that employment and earning piece and decide to draw values on what that says about a particular degree or program of study a student's gone into. The other piece of it, and then I promise I'll stop talking because I know I'm soapboxing here a little bit. I also think that the point of college is not just to get a piece of paper that you turn into the job factory for a job afterwards, right? you're supposed to learn stuff here. You're supposed to figure out stuff about yourself. You're supposed to experience people who are different than you. You're supposed to have your thinking challenged. You're supposed to have new experiences outside the domain of your home and your parents and the life that you've had beforehand. That's a lot harder to measure, right? And so those of us who do research and who do policy work based on research, we measure what we can measure, and the employment and earnings income, that's the numbers that are easy enough to grab. What's also interesting, though, is that there's also a nice vein of research that shows that when you ask most college graduates, and especially people who graduated from liberal arts institutions or liberal arts programs, were you satisfied with your experience? Did you learn? Did you meet the goals that you wanted to set for yourself? Overwhelmingly, they said, yes, I did. That they don't regret their education, that they're glad that they went, that they learned along the way. And that measure is actually even more significant for students who identify as coming from lower income backgrounds. That part of going to college was not just the earning potential that they had afterwards, it was their chance to think of themselves as a college graduate, to be the first in their family to do something potentially, to have that measure that I set a goal, I achieved it, I was able to navigate the system that was brand new to me and learned along the way. And so I think when we think about, when we frame these conversations about what's the value of liberal arts, I would just encourage us to really think about how we're asking that question and what the answers we're getting, who they leave out, what they leave out of that conversation, if we're just looking at the easiest data to pull to try to answer that question.
All right, I had a whole bunch of other questions, but I feel like we should just jump right to the elephant in the room, which is AI and the effect that it's having across society. Estimates vary, but some project that AI could eliminate more than 10 million jobs in the US by 2030. Closer to home, Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development studies said that about 1.6 million jobs in Minnesota, or about 56% of total employment, is highly exposed to AI. That doesn't mean that those jobs will be totally replaced, but they will be deeply impacted by artificial intelligence. And the authors of that study said that we need to shift to a kind of a mindset of using, trying to prevent cheating with AI to preparing students for a world where AI fluency is essential. And this is, I think, going to beget a whole host of questions, this AI piece. So how is it changing how you think about what you're offering students and how they need to adapt to these developments?
I think I want to answer that question in two different ways. One way has to do with the way the whole sector of higher education is reimagining what our purpose is and how we incorporate AI tools and skills into a curriculum for students for the purposes of career preparation. So that has to do with it would be malpractice for us to graduate students who are totally unfamiliar with AI because employers are going to expect them to have some facility with AI. So are we equipping students with the tools to use it responsibly? Will they understand what it's good for? Can they make meaning out of what it produces and look for errors? And will they be effective participants in the workforce? And by analogy, I'll say, I'm looking around this audience, and I'm going to take a guess here that some of you, like me, are old enough to remember when email first came out. When email first came out, I worked at a university, and there literally were faculty who made the department secretary, and it was a secretary back then, print out all the emails they received so that they could read them on paper, and then they hand wrote the responses and handed them back to a secretary who typed them into email, right? And that seems kind of funny and charming now, but at the time, it caused a lot of consternation and turbulence within the workforce. And we're experiencing a similar kind of shift right now, where there are some people who are early responders and like to play with new things and are curious about them and already are figuring out how to implement AI tools, both in teaching and for students in learning, in ways that are good and positive and enhance the experience. So that's, I think, one lane of activity for all higher ed institutions, and I think that liberal arts institutions are well equipped to help students figure out how to make meaning of what machines are producing. The other lane has to do with creating the ethical guardrails for the use of a new technology. And that's something, whether it's AI or, for that matter, email or Wikipedia, or we could go back as far as the photographic camera or the printing press. Anytime there's a new technology that comes along, the first response is moral panic. And then only after people have experienced the technology is there a period in which society begins to evolve some rules or some guardrails around its use, and also figure out how to hold people accountable for using it for bad purposes or harmful purposes. And I think right now we're still in the moral panic phase as a society with regard to AI. There are some early adopters who are using it and taking off, but we don't really have shared understandings about how to use it without violating people's moral codes. And because that's all in flux, I would again say liberal arts colleges are in a really good position to contribute to this conversation, because you need at the table for this conversation not just technologists. You need philosophers, you need historians, you need people who think about theology and what it is to be human. You need all of those different kinds of disciplines and perspectives to help society arrive at a place that we can feel comfortable understanding what are the benefits, but also what are the limits of a new technology. And Macalester is very much playing in that space, or I should say in both of those channels, both figuring out the nuts and bolts of how to use it in the classroom and how to help students use it well for job preparation, but also contributing to the literature about how to create the ethical guardrails that will allow all of us to benefit from the positive uses of AI and protect ourselves as well as we can for the negative uses and hold people accountable when they violate our moral boundaries.
Would it be too soon to say that AI developments would beget new majors and lead to others kind of being sloughed off?
I assume that that's the case. I think there will be jobs 10 years ago that none of us can imagine right now. Just like there are jobs today that we couldn't have imagined when many of us were in college. But again, it's the nimbleness, the durable skills are the things that allow you to tolerate those changes and weather those storms, as opposed to thinking, well, I got this one piece of paper that prepares me to do only one thing, and if a new technology comes along, I guess I just can't work anymore. I mean, that's what we're trying to guard against by giving people the ability to be flexible with these skills that can be applied in any situation and can be applied to learning about any new technology that will be developed in the future.
I mean, think about when I went to college, we didn't have computers then. I'm sorry. I had an electronic typewriter. I was it, okay?
Fancy.
Yeah, and don't judge. And I will tell you, when computers came, the explosion of the internet, right? And how the world was going to be transformed, and all the jobs that were going to be created, and moral, what was the phrase you used? Moral panic? Moral panic? You know, if you've been around long enough, you've been through more than one moral panic. And so I would submit that looking back, looking where we are in 2026, aren't we just immensely different because of that moment in technology? And I would submit we're in the midst of another one. It doesn't mean the demise. I would submit my 10-year-old great-nephew would not think he's in the midst of a demise because he's got a Switch to play on, right? So I would submit that it's a new reality for sure, but it makes us even more human. The requirement that we use the tools responsibly, of course, is really important, but the human element of it is never more critical than when you're using a tool like this. So it's a real opportunity, yes. Will it change the face of employment? Yes. Do the requirements of our humanity become even more critical? I also would say yes.
And I think that's where you can look at, technology has always shifted what's offered in terms of higher education opportunities, right? There's a reason that if I'm somebody who also has, as much as I love the liberal arts, I also have a big soft spot for community and technical colleges. They don't teach typewriter repair programs anymore, right? That got phased out. The technology changed. That was no longer relevant. That doesn't mean that now we didn't start teaching some other, then it turned into software and hardware repair instead. So there's going to be some of those natural transitions because there always is. But I would also point out that 150 years ago, people were studying the liberal arts. 100 years ago, people were studying the liberal arts. 50 years ago, people were studying the liberal arts. 50 years from now, people will still be studying the liberal arts. Because that generalist and that perspective of being able to be a holistic and a global thinker, that will serve you well no matter how technology changes. And I think there's a gamble in trying to predict and game out, like, okay, AI is coming, and so, for those of us who have high school and middle school kids, like, what does that mean about what they should study and what they should major in? I don't know. I mean, I could say, if you told a high school student 5 years ago, you should major in computer science because that field has great employment outcomes, the class of 2025 computer science graduates would like to have a word with you because they are not experiencing great employment outcomes right now, and liberal arts students are experiencing better employment outcomes because computer science, entry-level computer science positions have become really, really hard to find. And so I think that's where you get back to that messaging of, at the heart of this, you should study things that you enjoy learning. You should study things that make you curious. You should study things that give you skills that you can transport in a durable way to whatever the next thing in your life is going to look like, and not try to sort of gamble on what do I think is going to be the hot job 6 years from now, because nobody knows the answer to that question.
I also would say, though, that there's a bit of a pendulum swing. When I was in 1982, when I was going to school, the path was a 4-year degree. It's what you did. When my kids were getting ready for college, their path was a 4-year degree. Whether or not they wanted to do anything else, that was the path. So I would submit the pendulum was to one extreme in my generation, and given the needs of employers, which meant that we were overrepresented in liberal arts and underrepresented in the trades and the technical programs, you saw a swing of that pendulum towards we need more trades, we need more hands-on skills. And so I just feel like to some degree there needs to be another course correction back to a both-and approach, which was talked about earlier, which I think is really valid because some of us know when we're 17 what we want to do, which that means I target in on that mechanics program or that advanced manufacturing program. For those of us who really didn't know, who didn't discover their career path until they were 45, I would submit that a liberal arts degree was really helpful for me as it applied to any number of career paths, but I really do see this as a bit of a needed course correction back to center.
It's so interesting that you say that because while I definitely agree that there's more focus now on trades and post-secondary training that isn't necessarily a 4-year degree. And we've seen, for example, the push for workforce Pell is a way of getting the federal government to support people going into post-secondary training that's not necessarily a 4-year degree. So absolutely for sure, there's more emphasis in that area now. At the same time, it's also true that only about 37% of Americans get a 4-year degree now. That number has been relatively constant since World War II. Now, more people have started 4-year degrees, but only about 37% actually complete them and have them. And so what that means to me is that we've got a problem where people are getting more and more access, but they're not getting the support they need to complete. And so a lot of the concern that you're hearing about people saying that they're burdened with loan debt and they don't have anything to show for it and they wonder about the return on investment is because we have really opened the on-ramps to higher education, but we haven't done an awesome job with retention, persistence, completion. So then you have people who are paying back loans and do not have the benefits of the diploma. So one thing I'm really interested in is, is the push to workforce Pell and a focus on alternative post-secondary training a net positive for society because it's giving people access to something that, for whatever set of reasons, is more attainable and allows them to go straight into the workforce? Or essentially, are we sidestepping this other important problem that we still need to solve, which is that many, many more Americans would benefit from getting a 4-year degree if only we could serve them as well as they need to be supported in order to complete. And I think that that's a question that the whole higher ed sector hasn't paid enough attention to, which makes us vulnerable to criticism. So when people now say, is college worth it? Is the return on investment there? Part of what they're doing is looking at the experiences of people who are not living the everyday benefits of having the 4-year degree and are saying it's not worth it. Most of the lawmakers, by the way, have degrees, and most of them want their kids to get degrees. So I worry that what they're really saying is it's okay for other people to not get degrees.
So I would say yes and.
Yep.
My daughter I should have allowed, who allows an 18-year-old, right? They kind of do their own thing. My daughter wanted to be an auto mechanic. Over my dead body, you're going to go to school. Well, so was I right? I don't know that I was right. You know, I was insistent and a lot pushy. And so, but I also think that there's a both and what you said, Sue, because in the manufacturing sector, for example, I need CNC machinists. I need them to go to Dunwoody or another technical school and get that particular set of skills. And when the narrative in my generation, for sure, was even amongst the poor kids, I was a poor kid in my generation, and I had to figure out how to get scholarships to go to school. But when we're overbalanced in my kid needs to have a 4-year degree, what we end up is under-delivering those CNC machinists, the plumbers, the electricians, the construction folks, those who can get a real nice job right out of college, right after a 2-year or 4-year degree. So yes, and so I appreciate from a manufacturing perspective the fact that we're elevating and really giving a lot of credit to the technical skills that really are needed also. But again, it's a both and thing for me.
I want to just ask kind of an adjacent question, because we're focusing on the value of the 4-year degree for the students. But I wonder if higher ed institutions, I mean, there's a lot of people who say higher ed shouldn't be so squarely focused on the 18 to 22-year-old, right? That we need to be thinking of a bigger continuum of people who colleges could be serving. And I wonder how that plays into this conversation. I don't know if those older students would benefit in the same way from the liberal arts education as the younger people would, but Wendy, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's an important conversation, and we know that, you know, there's a population of students who have been groomed their whole lives that they're going to graduate from high school, they're going to go to college, that's sort of their social norm, that's their family's expectation. And I do think, to some of the points made earlier, when you do survey data of parents across every political ideology, every income band, every race and ethnicity community, and you say, do you want your kids to go to college? They say yes. Everybody wants their kids to go to college. The numbers start looking really different when you say, what about community colleges? Because everybody loves that for everybody else's kids, but they still want their kids to mostly go to 4-year institutions. We know that there are at least two populations of adult learners, right? There are some who are in the some college but no degree category who have that negative outcome of like, hey, you have all of the student loan debt, but none of the advancement opportunity that come with earning your credential because you didn't get that far. And then we have adults who, for whatever reason, after they finished high school, they didn't pursue post-secondary education at that time. I think those are both really important populations. And Minnesota, you know, we are a state that, according to some research, we are number 2 in the country behind Washington, D.C. in terms of the percentage of, or the number of adults with a bachelor's degree that will be necessary for our workforce by 2030, and by 2030 and 2035. We have an economy in the state that needs highly educated workers, and we are not going to meet those goals simply based on high school students. There's a population dip that we're currently in because 2008 was like not a great year for a lot of folks, so not a lot of babies being born. So colleges are not going to meet their enrollment goals based on just traditional age students, or we're not going to meet our state's workforce goals just on traditional age students. I do think it does raise a broader question about what are the types of institutions that are the most welcoming for adult learners and can help them sort of make that transition from understanding either if you have credit, how do you gather up your past credit and figure out how it works for something to start a new degree now, or here's the value proposition of why you should earn a bachelor's degree. I think we don't talk about higher ed very well in our culture. We talk way too much about highly selective institutions. No offense to Macalester or other highly selective institutions, but the research is really clear. Like, we culturally spend a lot more media time on the most highly selective institutions, which is not where adult learners go. It's not where, you know, that's not who educates the majority of our population. And I think that we sometimes talk, when we focus so much on the workforce outcomes component of it, especially for folks who maybe are hesitant or have had negative experiences with post-secondary education, there's an easier sell for saying, hey, major in something that the job that you're going to get at the end has the same title. So major in accounting, become an accountant. Major in nursing, become a nurse. If you're not somebody who's familiar with the higher, like, okay, like that makes sense to me. I understand from what I'm studying what I'm supposed to do with it afterwards. I think we have a messaging problem for talking about, hey, if you have a bachelor's degree, even if it's not something where your job title is going to be the same as your degree title, here's how you approach the world of work. Here's how you market yourself. Here's how you get professional experience while you're in school that will translate to a job afterwards. Here's how you build a resume that talks about the durable skills that you have with them. And that takes human intervention. That takes somebody to help folks who are navigating that potentially for the first time understand how to make some of those connections, and not just to say, okay, choose the path of least resistance or the degree program that feels the most familiar and most comfortable to you.
I would add to that another dimension to thinking about non-traditional age college students, and that is that our Board of Trustees just had a retreat last week in which one of the speakers was actually a Mac alumnus named Dr. Mitchell Stevens, who's a Stanford professor of sociology. He studies education. And he pointed out to all of us that the vast majority of colleges and universities in the United States were created between 1800 and 1900, when the life expectancy for adults was like 55. So they were educating people, from 18 to 22, who then maybe would work for like another 20 years or something like that. Now people are living into their mid-80s pretty regularly. They're still only getting maybe older.
At least.
At least.
Yeah.
And they're still by and large, if they are receiving post-secondary education, by and large they're graduating by 22. And now you've got 60 or 70 years after that. Who's attending to their lifelong learning needs? Because even if they did get the durable skills that you obtain in a liberal arts education, as has been pointed out already on this stage, technology is changing every 10 or 12 years, and actually it feels like it's turning over even more rapidly as we go along. So I think there are other interesting questions to be asked, in addition to, do we need to provide bachelor's degrees to people who are older than 22? The answer, I think, is yes. We just need to figure out how to get them in the door and serve them well. Everybody agrees. But also, what about people even who have the degree? Don't they have continuing needs to learn throughout the rest of their lives? And what role do colleges and universities have to play in meeting that need?
Well, just today a data point was shared with me that Mitchell-Hamlin Law School, they have students as old as 62, which speaks exactly to your point. I would submit that, as I'm reflecting back on this conversation, so when I was in the military, when it was West Germany. And so even then, though, what was really fascinating for me about the German education system is they had 3 different high schools. Hauptschule, the one that destined you for a liberal arts degree was gymnasium. So if you knew by the time you were 15-ish, you needed a certain degree of what's your GPA to get into gymnasium, and every parent wanted a kid in the gymnasium because then they can go to college. That means you had to know what you wanted to do when you were 15. And I can guarantee you, most of us were not operating in a 4.0 at 15. Somebody else's kid was, apparently, because you hear about it all the time, right? So you had to know what you wanted to be when you're 15, and then you're in that path, period. That is your destiny. And if you don't get a gymnasium, you don't go to 4-year degree. That's also your path. And I would submit and if you know what you want to be, great, lucky you. And I would submit more of us were like me. It took me to my 40s to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I would submit that a liberal arts degree was a good fit for me, absent a clear vision about I wanted to be a nurse, or for that matter, I wanted to be a CNC machinist. I just wanted to grow up and figure out how to navigate the world, and my particular degree was not in something I do today, but I would submit I use it every single day, so.
We've touched a little bit on kind of the flavor of this question, but given the polarization we see in the country right now, a lot of what you're talking about is having this sort of skill set to be curious about other people and to have a both-and perspective, which I think we can say as a country we're very challenged in those skills right now. I know that Macalester does have this program, Dialogue Across Differences, which is trying to get students to, really kind of supercharge those skills. Let's just kind of talk about that as part of the role of education in this current environment. Can you tell us about that program?
Yeah, We have a series of programs under that umbrella of dialogue across difference, and the reason is because we observed, well, I got here in 2020, let's just start there, to say it was a time of a lot of chaos and strife and disagreement. And one thing that became very apparent to our leadership team is that students were not arriving at college having consistently received the tools to engage constructively in conflict or to listen with curiosity and an open mind to people who have very different points of view. And to be fair, the leadership in our country wasn't giving them great examples, and they still are not, right? So students sometimes were arriving at college thinking, if we don't agree on absolutely everything, I guess we can't be friends. Or maybe even I have to say bad things about you on social media, but definitely we're not going to bridge this divide. And it seemed to us an absolute tragedy, because where else but colleges and universities do you intentionally bring together people from every walk of life, in this case at Macalester, 105 different countries,
Wow.
every faith tradition, every political persuasion, every socioeconomic class. This is a golden opportunity. It's maybe the only kind of opportunity at college or university anymore to actually practice the American experiment of bringing people together in close proximity to live and learn together intimately. It's very hard to hate people when you're looking across a table at them, having a meal with them, or in class with them. So let's make sure we equip them with the skills to really do that well. And that means listening to understand rather than listening to judge or to argue. So in order to give those tools, we decided we needed to create some programs that actually give students a chance to practice with healthy examples, with role play, with scripts, with experience. One of the programs I'll just tell you about briefly, and then I want to hear from the other panelists about this. One of the programs involves a partnership between Macalester and University of Northwestern, which is just up the street on Snelling. It's a conservative evangelical Christian college. And the students at Northwestern, if we didn't invite them, probably would have no reason to interact with Macalester students, and vice versa. They're living in totally parallel universes on most days. But I and their president worked together with help from the Braver Angels initiative in the state, which brings together Reds and Blues, but in this case is bringing together students from both campuses. And we made a commitment to have dinner with a group of Mac students and Northwestern students every other week for deep engagement to develop trust so that we could practice the skill of listening with an open mind, but also really practice honoring another person's humanity, really affirming their dignity, even if we disagree passionately on the big issues in life. And that's a relatively small program, but like I said, it's part of a whole menu of other programs. And I think that this movement is taking off on other college and university campuses across the country as people realize that while things are quite divided and quite polarized, they're not going to get any better unless we actually take responsibility, assign ourselves the duty to try to fix the problem by equipping students with the tools to do conflict better.
Right. Just a little plug for Minnesota Public Radio. My colleague Catherine Richard did a story on that program with the students from those two different institutions going bowling together, which was quite a lark. B, I wonder, from employers' perspective, I don't know how often kind of political strife rears its head in workplaces, but just the ability to sort of like be able to work in a conflictual situation with someone or work it out. Maybe tell me how you see that as like an important skill set maybe that's getting built along the way.
So we just had our big annual meeting last week, and the whole theme was about leadership and what it looks like. And a key component of that includes this idea of competing goods. That you've got pride in us, grief about us, hope versus reality, legacy versus innovation. There's a sense of you've got to live in a very nuanced, complex world. And I would submit, Sue and I are friends, and so we've talked already about how might we use this dialogue across difference in the chamber marketplace as well, because certainly there's a political aspect of my role, and if we remember that the simple issues were solved a long time ago, the stuff we're wrestling with right now is really hard, whether it's a political issue or a social issue or how we organize college for our kids, right? And so entering dialogue, entering into relationship from a posture of curiosity as opposed to certitude, because that's where possibility lives, right? I think is really, really important. And so I don't know if that answers your question.
It'd be really neat if you guys got a partnership going together. And Wendy, I don't know if, from your vantage point, if you're seeing this playing out somehow. I mean, you are coming at it from the state perspective. Anything you would add? Yeah.
Well, not necessarily from a state perspective, but as the experience of somebody who's living with a 17-year-old. I mean, especially when we look at our traditional age students, this part's not done cooking yet, right? So developmentally, they are still, their brains are still forming. They are still very much living in a black and white universe. You know, I've joked, but not really, that one of the things that's been the most challenging for my son this year is having to come to terms with the fact that as he navigates the college admissions pathway, that his mother knows more than he does about it, because I've worked in higher ed for 25 years. And so, you know, he's in that zone where he has so much more certainty than he does life experience. So much certainty. And so, you know, I think it's really important to recognize that that's where students are coming in, right? So that, like, developmentally, that's totally normal. That's the way that their brains are formed. We are also, this is one of the concerns about, like, generative AI. Like, if students are using ChatGPT, it is designed to agree with you. So if you are coming in with presuppositions and you're using ChatGPT for research, which, I'm in the moral panic phase about it. I'm not a big AI fan. It is going to tell you, yes, you're right. And so it's going to entrench students even further. But this goes back to the whole premise of this conversation, is that one of the things that the liberal arts does really well is to help students understand that knowledge is contested, right? And so I remember when I was a history major, it had never occurred to me that when my teachers were teaching me things about history, they were making choices about what to teach me and what not to teach me. That there is a different narrative about what happened in World War II if you grew up in Japan versus if you grew up in the United States. That blew my mind when I was 18 years old. That, oh wait, historians fight with each other? Because there's not just one true narrative version? Like, the world's actually a lot more complicated than I realize, and knowledge is a thing that's ever evolving, and that you can have two people who both have PhDs in history who are absolutely fighting with each other about something that happened. And understanding that, the world is not black and white is one of the real gifts of a liberal arts education, because you can't get through a liberal arts education without the idea of recognizing that knowledge is created and contested and ever evolving. And I think that has to translate into that shifts how people's worldview changes in some really positive and beautiful ways.
Yeah. One of the things we tell students during orientation when they arrive at MAC, do we have any students in the audience today, right now? Looks like they're all busy doing other things. Oh, we have a few in the back. One thing that I say at orientation is, if you leave here thinking about everything exactly the way you did when you started, if you feel the same way about everything on graduation day, we have failed you. Because part of the process of being educated is to stretch and grow and experience the discomfort of having your views challenged, and consider the possibility that you were wrong about something or that you have something more to learn. So we don't promise students absolute comfort. We don't tell them that they will never be challenged when they're here. In fact, we say, try new things, try new music, read new books, change your hair, fall in love, try new foods, do all these things that are really going to help you transform into the kind of adult you're going to be. Because if on graduation day you're the same person you were when you showed up here on orientation day, I don't know what we've been doing here for 4 years, but it's not challenging you and helping you to grow.
You know, I wanted to tie back a little bit what you said earlier about the question about employers. This idea about pendulum swing. So a generation ago, the pendulum swing was from liberal arts, not enough technical students, and we needed to readjust our mindset and really empower the technical body of work, which is STEM, right? Thank you. Yeah. Really critically important. I would submit that another pendulum swing that we're dealing with right now, and it certainly speaks to the employer experience, is that an overweight on technology and an underweight on the human connection element is posing a similar challenge.
How so?
So how employers are experiencing that is a young person is going to show up with the skill to do a job, absent the interpersonal abilities to find their way in a team, or to navigate through a big company such that they could maybe try a different job, and retention. So what employers are feeding back to us is, we can hire younger people. We're struggling with the retention of those younger people, and it has as much to do with finding their way in community. If we acknowledge that as humans we're social creatures, and I've seen it in my world, certainly, the struggle to find our way as social creatures, we're inclined to retreat altogether. And so even social organizations like a Chamber of Commerce, we are really invested in pre-career students. We want to tell you, let me introduce you to the world of community in the professional world, and let's help you navigate your first job and then finding your way into maybe your second job, or even moving to a different job in that same company, such that you can commit to a culture that fits you. Really is posing to be, is showing up as a real challenge right now. If we're overly technically ready but under socially ready, it's showing up in the workplace.
So interesting. And do you see, I mean, certainly there's always for internships and that kind of thing, but is there more of a role for employers to kind of, I don't know, get access to students earlier on in their educational experience and during college to kind of help nurse them along on this path that
Absolutely, yes. I would say there's a mixed experience in terms of either success or opportunities. Employers don't always know how to do it. You know, if I'm busy doing my job and someone wants to pull me away from my job to invest in tomorrow, we know that as a leader we need to spend a lot of time working on our business as well as in our business. It's hard to manage that priority shift. So I would say employer, one of the roles of a Chamber of Commerce for just a moment is to be that connection point, or that bridge to help employers get connected to education, particularly in the higher ed space. Employers aren't going to say, call Sue and say, hey, I'm a really smart person. I want to talk to your students about just how cool I am. But if Sue calls me and says, hey, I know you're really cool and smart and I want to introduce you to my students, I'll come. So our job then is to bring those two together, or support high school internship programs or college internship programs. We're very interested in connecting employers with Macalester students for potential internship opportunities. And college students are that much more interesting because you're more cooked. You're more ready to function in a job environment, and so they're going to be an actual benefit. So I would say, yes, there's an increasing opportunity and need for business to engage with higher ed. The question is, like, how do you do it? And there's not always a good path forward.
And I think there's also a space where I think both in higher ed and in the employer sector where people need to get comfortable saying the quiet parts out loud and recognizing that, especially if you really do value having a diverse workforce and people coming from a variety of backgrounds, you can't assume that everybody has the same knowledge about why, you know, here's why our dress code is and here's why we have that dress code, or this is the office culture around this and this kind of thing. And I think that's where you sometimes see some of the generational gaps between sort of administrative or senior management levels and entry-level folks sometimes. But I think that's where, you know, having to sort of center of like, okay, if somebody's entering this space for the first time, what are the things that they may not know, and how do we communicate those to them in a way that doesn't first have them make a mistake and then find out about it in a corrective way, but sort of how do you take the invisible parts of your office culture or your employment sector and make those visible for folks before they get into those, I think is something that both higher ed and employers can play a role in doing that. I also think that there's some, you know, one of the conversations that comes up a lot is like internships. And again, internships are sometimes easier when you're in those majors where your major title is the same as your job title, right? And so it's thinking about like, how do you talk about or frame out internships or co-ops or work experience opportunities for students who are doing things like history, who are doing things like, you know, philosophy, where there's not sort of an automatic, well, this is where I would end up working. And I think that's where, there are some opportunities where, employers can look at like, well, who do we have working for us and what are their backgrounds and how do we connect back into alumni networks of their previous institutions, or how do we frame out, we have 10 employees who are doing this task, and of those 10 employees, 8 of them have totally different academic backgrounds. What does that tell us about how we market this internship or how we market this entry-level position? And so I think there's certainly a lot more space that can be done on some of that early work exposure for liberal arts students in particular.
You know what employers are doing, which I find really interesting? This generation of college graduates, certainly they've come at me with, so what's my career path? When I was 21, 22, 24, I just said, please give me a job and I'll just work. Pay me, please. And today they want a plan. So that is a generational difference that I see very distinctly. And so what I see smart companies doing is they're hiring, especially the bigger the company, the easier that is to do, is they give you rotational opportunity. And this goes back to the retention the comment I made earlier in the healthcare space. You can start in one specialty and go to any number of other specialties and stay within the same system, right? So too, these big companies will give you, they'll call it a management track, so the new 22-year-old feels like they're in charge. I'm on a management track. But what they're really doing is saying, let's try the company on for size, and let's be intentional about moving you from department to department until you find one that feels like you. And if you're like me and you didn't know what you was, that would have been really nice to introduce me to the different ways that company might show up.
I was just thinking, as a philosophy major, I didn't know where to intern. Didn't have.
I love the idea of a summer philosophy internship. Just going to a company and being like, what is a good life?
But I think I also didn't know at the time how many different career paths would have been open to me. And there was just sort of this messaging that I needed to stay on an academic track, and if you're in the humanities, you're going to maybe just go on to grad school or something. And so I wonder if that is also something that higher ed institutions need to do more of, is to show what the options are.
We definitely feel more pressure and more responsibility to help students with discernment about career exploration. We're at Macalester, we're calling it life design now, because we recognize that students are thinking about, do I go to work? Do I go to grad school? Do I do a form of national service? And by the way, the first thing I do after graduation isn't the only thing I'm going to do in my life. So how do I design a life that looks the way I imagine for myself? And the discernment process starts the day they set foot on campus. Like, our career exploration team is meeting with students in their first year through their fourth year, and we tell our graduates, career exploration is here for you for life. So even 4 years, 8 years, 20 years after you've graduated, you can call up and say, hi, I went to Macalester, I'm having a career shift, where you help me to rework my resume, because I haven't done one in a while. And we feel a sense of obligation, like, yes, you belong to Mac, so we're going to continue to serve you in that way, because we recognize your first job isn't going to be your only job. And I think this is part of the larger trend of society holding higher ed institutions more accountable to be relevant and to serve a public purpose, to contribute to a sense of civic prosperity, both in terms of producing citizens who can tend to our fragile democracy, but also workers who will contribute to our economy in ways that are really productive.
I just have to give you a shout out, though, and really say higher ed has developed in the last 40 years, because that's what you just said, I would say it has been an evolving awareness. One of the challenges, especially if you're a poor kid, your ideas of leaving high school is what your mom does, what your best friend's aunt does, right? Or your next door neighbor does. That was my worldview. And so we're focusing on high school kids, and in some cases middle school kids, with let's talk about this and expose these kids to the art of possibility beyond their own personal experience. I stumbled into where I went to school. She was a nice lady and they had horses, so I went there. That was it, you know? And what I hear from you is I'm just so impressed by how higher ed shows up today with more intentionality than ever, connecting with people younger than ever to say, we're gonna, even high schools, the career pathways work in high schools. St. Paul Public School System is really extraordinary, and I would submit it's, you know, replicated elsewhere. This investment with intentionality with kids about what they want to help them think through, that wasn't really available, you know, 40 years ago. So kudos to you, And I would submit that the exploring kids to the possibilities that they're not personally exposed to is really, really important.
And I think, I've sometimes joked, I got my start working in the world of admissions, and we would, joke that the school I worked at, 50% of our students said that they were coming in majoring in pre-law or pre-med, and so we just said those were our pre-money majors. The majority of students at that institution graduated with degrees in communications or psychology. We also have to normalize that it's okay to not have it figured out in high school, and it's okay to not necessarily, if you are in college or have a college degree, raise your hand. Okay. Keep your hand up if you never changed your major. Okay, so those are the unicorns, right? Because the average college student changes their major 3 times. And so I think we also have to normalize that exploration is a part of the process. And I think also kind of meeting where especially our traditional age students, meeting them where they're at. This is a generation of kids who have been told from very early age, everything is worse than it used to be. You're probably not going to be as successful as your parents are going to be. You're not sure what the job market is going to be. You're not going to necessarily be able to buy a house someday. Also, if you don't have it all figured out right away, you're behind.
The young people are laughing. They're like, I know what that's about.
That's a lot of the messages. And so to meet students where they're at and realize you are coming in with a lot of anxiety about whether or not you have figured it all out at the ripe old age of 18. And it's okay that you haven't, and you're gonna sample a bunch of things, you're gonna learn a whole bunch of things, you're gonna be changed as a result of your education, and then you're gonna find things to do that are jobs that you don't even know that they exist yet, and that's a normal part of the process. And I think we need to do some normalization of that too, and not just, I think the pathway stuff can be really helpful, but I think it can also be a little bit stressful for students who don't feel like they've found that pathway at 15.
Right. I think we would like to open it up to some audience questions. So do we have someone who's going to rove with a microphone? One moment here. I think there's a gentleman here in the first row has a question.
First of all, is this on?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you all. This has been illuminating, really. I particularly love the kinds of connections that you're making throughout the community, however you define the community. I'm going to give you just a quick synopsis of myself, very quick, before I ask a question. I started out as a dairy farmer. When I came to the age of majority, I wouldn't say I was an adult, I played professional baseball, went into the Air Force, ended up in Germany, as you did, actually training German Air Guard to handle some of the equipment we gave them in the early 60s. Give you some clue of how old I am. I've taught at the university over 33 years, 3 different ones, University of Arizona, University of Wisconsin, and Minnesota. The reason I ended up in Minnesota is because I happened to marry a St. Paul woman, and they're like lemmings. They always have to come back here. Anyway,
Kind of like the Forrest Gump vibes from this trajectory of doing everything. It's amazing.
Anyway, when I retired from the University of Minnesota, on the faculty senate, and they always give you an opportunity to say a few words before you leave. And one of the things I reminded them of, and myself, was that we have turned the University of Minnesota into a glorified vocational school. And if you don't believe that, ask your students. And if you don't believe them, ask their parents. I don't really think the first purpose is to learn something, but it's to get certified and to get a job. And the University of Minnesota had an interesting motto. They said, "We are the economic engine of the state." And I often wondered, why aren't you the civic virtue engine of the state? I mean, what is our purpose anyway? By the way, the idea of telling students, most of my teaching has been with graduate students. I taught in a PhD program here in Minnesota. I often ask my students on the first day, why are you taking my class? And a common answer would be, well, it's a great school. I'm going to get certified, and I'll have a diploma from a very good school. I'll be able to get a better job. And I would have to remind them, no. Give me a real reason why. I was teaching philosophy at the time. And so after a number of reasons, I would say no. The reason you're in my class is to become a more interesting person, because right now you're boring the hell out of me.
Well, I wonder if we could parlay that into a question of, there is this immense pressure to have kind of, push the vocational trajectory and the major that will really directly translate into a job.
But the way I would address that is to say, like, I get asked this by parents sometimes when I'm presenting to them, will my child get a job if they come to Macalester? And my answer is always, well, that's the bare minimum of what we're going to do for your child. Of course they're going to get a job. And we have the data to back it up. We know within 6 months of graduation that 95% of our students are either working in their chosen field, or they're in grad school or a fellowship or Teach for America or AmeriCorps, Peace Corps. But we're going to do so much more than merely prepare them for a job. We're going to prepare them to be a citizen who works to create a more just and peaceful world. And to your point, not every college or school assigns themselves responsibility to create a more just and peaceful world. Some of them focus merely on job preparation, but not also on being a good person.
I think
Just to go back to that, the liberal arts is what we're talking about. T.S. Eliot, in an interesting poem called Choruses to the Rock, said, where is the where is the knowledge that we have lost in information, and where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge, and where is the life we have lost in living? These are questions that I think make the person a better employee. By the way, one of the things I used to do, I did some work for our State Department around the world on the idea of moral capitalism or democratic capitalism. My undergraduate in a liberal arts school was at Lawrence in Appleton, Wisconsin. And I also was a member of the National Humanities faculty. One of the things that always seems to occur to me is the liberal arts as a perspective. The poet Goethe, the German poet, said he said a man, that's what it was in those days, if a man didn't have 5,000 years at his grasp, he was living from hand to mouth. It seems to me that what does the liberal arts have to do with the development of perspective? Perspective of knowledge, perspective of people, perspective of time. And I think the perspective makes a person a much better citizen. And by the way, the citizen...
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, we want to give someone else another chance to ask a question too, but...
just one thought I wanted to share is, so in my role as the Office of Higher Education, I work on both sides of the house with the legislature, with the governor's office. We set policy at the state level. And I often think about how we talk about education sometimes requires a little bit of code switching. If you're familiar with that concept, is there are people for whom higher education is a public good, and you don't have to make the arguments about why it should be funded, why it should be supported, why everybody should have access to it, because it's understood to be a public good that everybody should benefit from. And that you can point to, people who have a college degree are more likely to vote, they're more likely to be civically engaged, they're more likely to volunteer, they're more likely to donate philanthropically. There's all these really good, positive community, social, family outcomes that come with it. And then there are people who say, well, my tax dollars shouldn't go to making you more interesting. My tax dollars should go to you getting a job so that you put more money into the tax base later on. And both things are true, right? And so sometimes it's the messaging and how you're framing the value proposition of higher education kind of depends on the audience that you're talking to and sort of what's more compelling to that audience. And this is one of those things where like the moral thing and the pragmatic, fiscally responsible thing happen to be the same, which is that fund higher education, give people opportunity and access to get to it, they will become more interesting, and they will also find better employment and economic outcomes afterwards. But not every audience wants to hear both sides of that equation, I think.
I think I would say that there's a third component of this argument, which is that whether or not you go to college, we all benefit from there being a higher ed sector. Because for one reason, these are anchor institutions that contribute to the communities in which they exist. So we employ people, we spend millions of dollars in goods and services, we open up our campuses for events like this. Everyone in St. Paul benefits from this, right? But also as a society, we all benefit. Because if you drove on a bridge to get over here today and it didn't collapse, you can thank an engineer for having an education, right? If your kids go to school and they're being taught by teachers, if you went to the dentist and you got a tooth fixed, like almost everything you need to live a full life relies on the fact that some people are getting degrees because you need that expertise. It benefits all of us whether we go to college or not. And I feel like that part really gets lost in the argument about whether college is worth it or not.
I think there's a question back here.
I'm a McAllister alumnus, and the comment about the certitude of youth and Dr. Rivera's comment about change occurring during those 4 years of undergraduate education leads me to just this brief comment, and that is that I had the good fortune of having 2 courses from the legendary Dr. J. Theodore Metow, political scientist. At the end of one of the courses, he said, if college has done nothing else for you, McAllister should teach you to question your assumptions.
I kind of want to just build on that a little bit. And I think it's, there's been a lot of ink spilled in recent years about how the composition of faculty at liberal arts institutions skewing very liberal compared to having more conservative voices. And I wonder how, is that something, do schools need to try to more actively recruit folks from more diverse perspectives? Because that is something that seems to play out a lot, that students, their mentors are coming from a particular political perspective.
Well, we're all prone to live in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
Right? If you're gonna, I'm not watching a football game with you if you're a Green Bay Packers fan. I'm just telling you. I want to hang out with Minnesota fans. Sue comes over to my house. She knows she's getting my kind of hot dish. And she calls it a casserole. She needs to come try it again. We all like our community. That's just being human, right? And I think it's really okay for us to be social and embrace how I do my holidays and go to your house and do it your way as well also. So there's a both and I would agree absolutely that there is an inclination, whether you're at Bethel or at St. Ben's or at McAllister or any other school, that we tend to create an echo chamber of like-minded thinking. And let's not pretend that getting a higher education protects you from being ignorant. How many of us know smart people who are really ignorant, right? Whether or not I agree with a position or not, it's the closed-mindedness of of choice. So I would submit it's really important, and Sue mentioned that very specifically. You've got to be in fellowship with people who think differently. Good people disagree about hard things. And I would submit the most critical point about higher education and just being a good human is leaning in with that role of how can I embrace thoughtfully, how can I be more curious than certain, how can I assume, there's a book called The 4 Agreements. If you haven't read it, it's this little book about the 4 rules of life. It's beautiful. And one of them is assume good intent. I'm going to meet Sue and I don't know you. And I'm going to assume that you want the best for me, and you're going to assume that I want the best for you, and that's where we're going to start. And that also means that when you are hiring for an higher ed or for high school or for a company, you should hire to your weakness. You should hire to a perspective or an expertise that you don't have to create, by definition, a well-rounded experience.
I also think that's where I'll put a little bit of pressure on the media. When we talk about sort of the supposed liberalness of college faculty, we really need to be thinking about post-secondary education in the most holistic terms, because how politically diverse the faculty level is gets real different when you start including community college faculty, technical college faculty, faculty at regional public institutions, faculty at Christian colleges. The perspective of who is a faculty member, if you are just looking at the most highly selective liberal arts, private liberal arts institutions, that's one lane, but that's not all of higher education.
That's 3% of the 4,000
Right.
colleges and universities
So
in the U.S.
yeah, I've had the good fortune to work in higher education in multiple states and multiple systems at research ones, community colleges, private liberal arts colleges. Faculty are more diverse than folks think, but we tell the same stories over and over again.
Also, can you imagine a hiring process in which people have to disclose what party they vote for? I mean, I really wonder what solutions people want for this perceived problem, you know?
I think there's a question over here.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Great discussion. Quick question regarding the retention, actually, and completion of the four-year degree. I was curious, is that I think it was 37% you said of Americans have
Have a four-year degree.
four-year degree. How does that compare globally? If you have any global data in regards to other countries? And then also, as you're talking about the pendulum swinging, if there's any global pendulum swinging also in other countries, and also just in regards to the liberal arts kind of education comparatively globally. So just kind of some global questions if you happen to have that. Thanks.
We're all looking at you, Sue. We got nothing.
I am really sorry to tell you that I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sure the Google machine can tell us. I can't tell you, but my guess would be that in countries that have more of a single-payer health care and free or nearly free access to higher education, that you might find higher proportions of the population have four-year degrees, but I haven't done a comparative study to be able to tell you that definitively. But I see Dean Wilcox nodding her head yes behind you.
And I think there's obviously, the world's a really big place, and there's some very big differences depending on what part of the world you're looking at. The American higher education model is in some ways more open access than other countries are, so you may find some other Western democracies where the college completion rates are higher because college is free, because it's perceived as a public good, but it may not be as open access as our system is, and so that's the trade-off for access sometimes.
Like if you can only get it because you tested a certain way when you were 15 years old.
If only 20% of the students are able to test into it, they're going to be students are more likely to graduate at highly selective institutions because those are the most high-achieving students. The same thing happens sort of on the country level. We also, the community college model is not necessarily a universal either, and so that kind of complicates some of those factors when you're trying to do country-by-country comparisons.
I think there's a question right here in the middle.
I actually just wanted to jump on that topic. So I work at Metro State, which for those of you who don't know is part of the Mid-State system. We're unique in that 30 is the average age of incoming students, and 90% of our students are transfer students. A lot of those coming from the community and technical colleges. And we specifically are looking, I work in admissions currently, and so my day-to-day is students coming in and making the case to me of why liberal arts education is important for them. And there's a both and that I'm always struck with of there is the practicality of you can't contemplate higher order things and thinking about the world if you can't put food on the table, if your kids, you don't have daycare for your kids. And so there are real economic incentives that matter for this education. But then also I see, and didn't want to cut you off, Nago, but a lot of students who come to Metro thinking, I'm going to get that degree in nursing, I'm going to get that degree in cybersecurity, and then discover a whole wider world of possibilities that are out there. It's a whole different part of society that they've never entered or been. So how can we, as in society as a whole and higher education as a whole, really work on some of that insularity and that idea that, we think a lot about private versus public. We think about highly selective versus not selective, instead of thinking about what does a pathway look like for a student that starts right out of college at a community college, maybe has some life stuff come up, drops off, but then later wants to end up at a McAllister or at a St. Thomas, and the pathway's there, where then they can be at another institution and have the support to not feel like the only person in their 30s at that institution. Does that kind of make sense what I'm getting at?
I mean, I think taking off my Office of Higher Education hat for just a second, speaking as Wendy Robinson, private citizen, I think college affordability and state support for higher education is a really big answer to that question, to make sure that folks are not self-selecting out of any one type of institution because of perceived cost. We don't do a good job talking about how financial aid works. People don't have a great sense of what what their costs will actually be when they get there. I think students really overestimate, when you look at the landscape in the Twin Cities area, there are more private colleges than there are public four-year institutions available. The cost ranges look really scary on paper in a way that they don't actually show up for students when they actually have done their financial aid, especially if they're state financial aid eligible. But I don't know if we've done the best job that we can to help people and know that and anticipate that before they start that process. So I think we do have that self-selection bias as a part of it. I also, and again, my background, before I worked for OHE, I was a vice president of student affairs, and so my areas there were advising, student support, counseling, basic needs, all of that. If we are going to commit to enrolling students, we have to commit to giving them the tools and the support that they need to be successful. We cannot give a false promise of access without the support necessary. And so that's recognizing that most students who withdraw from an institution withdraw in good academic standing. They're not leaving because they're not being successful academically. They're leaving for a whole host of reasons, some of which the school can intervene on, some of which they can't. Sometimes people just have lives are in really challenging situations. But I think not pulling back from the support of saying academic advising, good advising early is critical. Career services, as you mentioned before, is critical. Counseling services, student basic needs, financial support, all of those I think are really important. And I think they become more important the more complicated a student's life is.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a very fair criticism of the higher ed sector is that the whole pricing model is so opaque. And if you're not born unto it, if you're a first generation student or you come from a low income background, it's really hard to navigate. It's not intuitive at all. The sticker price for most private colleges and universities is the price that hardly anyone pays. But you only find out how generous the financial aid could be if you take the time to apply to the school and you complete the FAFSA application where you enter information about your family's finances. And once you complete the FAFSA and it says your family's contribution is $1,000, that's all we think your family can afford. That's true whether you go to Yale or Macalester or Min State or wherever. Your family can still only come up with that $1,000. And that means that if a school lets you in and they commit to meet the full need, which not all colleges and universities do, Macalester does, then we would make up the rest. So one step I think a lot of schools are beginning to take is to just be much more transparent on the front end about what a student and their family could expect to pay even before they apply, so that it's not a guessing game. Because I think one of the real tragedies of the way the system works right now is that a lot of people select themselves out of the applicant pool because they're so afraid of the sticker price, and if only they would have applied, they would have found out that we would have given them very generous, robust support. So one thing Macalester did a year ago was that we now advertise this program called the Macalester Promise, which says if your family earns less than $100,000 a year, we're telling you up front you will qualify for totally free tuition. And it takes the guessing.
Pause on that. Say that again.
It takes the guessing out of it. And the thing is that it was our practice before we announced that. So announcing it isn't a new commitment of new money, it's just a new way of talking about a system that was so difficult to understand before. And I think there are a lot of people in Minnesota who haven't heard that or don't know that, who might think, oh, I can't apply to Macalester. I only have these other choices over here because I can't afford private education, when in fact the privates often are more affordable, especially for low-income students.
I think that there's a follow-up question here, and then Jake, there's another person in the back. Do we have time for one more after that? Just a quick one? Oh, okay.
Be quick.
You want to?
Yeah, so I'm a first-generation student too, and I went to law school in Alexandria, Egypt, and I had to leave, and I came here, had family, and then just recently, I'm like, I need to find something that I'm passionate about, and for me, it was going back to school. And looking for colleges, I think there's a lot of colleges that are not conducive for working adults, first of all. Second, being poor is exhausting. And when you come from poverty, you really don't think about the future. You're in survival mode. And when you look at the high school students who do not go to college, it's because their family don't know the knowledge and the information that other people have. And I see the system is putting barrier for those family and those students to keep them in place. And I believe that education is the only way that can rise everyone up from poverty for intellectually in terms of thinking, and can bridge the gap that we have seen that is being widened really hard. My thinking is, how can we get to those high school students and to mentor them and help them come into school and say, education is possible, college is possible. But I can tell you, like, I look at the sticker price, and even I have 4 kids, I looked at the sticker price, I'm like, there is no way I can afford putting them in a great school. How can you, when some student coming from a single home parent, there is no way this student have the support that they can rise up above poverty. Can we implement, like, for example, in high school, tap into the adult community who are retired, who are not working, to come in and teach student, the high school student, whether communication skills, or whether how to approach something, or how to talk about college with them, especially when students who are coming from poor background. Sorry.
I would just say, not that I'm an expert in this field, but I know my son he's in St. Paul Public Schools, and there is a college track program called AVID, where they try to expose kids to the idea of going to college, and they had a big thing, they have multiple career days. It's one of the themes was you can't be what you can't see. So I think there are efforts like that. I don't know how it is in other school systems, but.
Well, all said, Minnesota is considered a lead state in the country right now, and I'm not from Minnesota. I'm a Minnesotan by choice, but not by birth, so I'm allowed to brag about Minnesota. So we are actually considered sort of the lead state in the country for a program called Direct Admissions, and that is a program that's run by the Office of Higher Education that is expanding to every public high school in Minnesota, where students at the start of their senior year will get a letter that's personalized to them that says, hey, based on what you've already done, here's a list of colleges and universities that I've guaranteed that you'll be admitted if you choose to apply to them. And if you apply through Direct Admissions, we'll waive your application fee, so you can apply without having to worry about that. And we've also started to embed information about financial aid in that process as well, so that every student who's attending a public high school will eventually get something that tells them your college material, these are the colleges that are saying yes, here's how you start to help pay for it. It's one of the things I'm really, really excited about. We have 55 colleges and universities participating. We're the only state in the country where participation includes tribal colleges, community colleges, technical colleges, private colleges, and four-year public institutions. We are in about 250 high schools right now, but we're continuing to try to grow that program. And it's just to try to do that exact thing, to make sure every student has had that message that they are college material and that there's resources and help for them to navigate that journey.
All right. Wow. Oh.
One follow-up thing about that, high school teacher for 30 years.
Oh, hey.
Right, and Wendy, maybe you might be best set up to answer this question, or just something to know about the high school setting. For every St. Paul public school that is doing a beautiful job in career pathways, there are 3 that are not funded for it. Minnesota ranks 48th in the state, in the nation, 48th out of 50 for counselor to student ratio. We currently have 522 students per counselor. So North Star Promise is fantastic, Avid is fantastic, and there aren't enough bodies in the buildings to get that information to the students. So I don't know, if you're lobbying for anything, it would be to sort of get more bodies into career pathways in those high schools.
And I can tell you that the counselor-student ratio comes up every single year in the legislative session. It's a known issue. It's a known challenge for the state. I will say that direct admissions is partially in response to that, recognizing that schools may not every school has the same capacity in terms of doing the college exploration work, just depending on what their counseling staff looks like. And there's some really big gaps geographically, school district-wise, that are it's gonna be a long road for Minnesota to improve on that metric, just to be super candid.
All right, I think I'm getting some wrap it up signals here from from Jake. Yeah, it's great. No, this has been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much. Well, let's give our panelists a round of applause first. And I think Luna has some closing remarks here.
I'm closing us out. Okay, good. This is live. I had written closing remarks, but I carried the music stand off stage earlier, so I'm going off the cuff. Thank you so much to our moderator and our panelists for an amazing conversation. Thank you to all of you and to those of you listening or watching later on for your civic engagement. You can go to citizensleague.org to sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media, see all the things that are coming up, notably this Thursday at noon virtually if you are a member of Citizens League. There's a virtual member event about what's happening with Minnesota politics and policy right now, and you can become a supporting member at any time. And on April 16th, Thursday, April 16th, we have our annual event, Civic Celebration, which brings people together to honor civic leaders and celebrate the work that we're doing. And you can always email policy@citizensleague.org if you have questions or ideas and want to chat. But again, thank you. Thank you to McAllister. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to all of you. Travel safe, be well, embrace both and thinking. Happy Women's History Month.